Today, we're going to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of a recently released indie dungeon crawler by the name of Hellslave. If you're interested in just certain aspects of the game, there will be timestamps below, but for those of you wanting to get the big picture, let's dive on in. As the story begins, it places us in a forsaken world besieged by the forces of hell that batter the last bastions of humanity, breaking hope and souls in equal measure. You take the role of an individual who, with good intentions, but arguably terrible judgment, decides to make a pact with one of these demons to gain the powers and tools to try and reverse this flow. The way this is woven into gameplay is by making your selection of demonic hosts essentially serve as class selection, with a choice of 6 different demons specializing in their own overarching themes. This decision will define the structure of your skill tree and in turn what equipment and strategies will be optimal for you, especially early on. Now, it is key to note that there is overlap between these, but the placement of the skills will very much favor the host you have chosen. After selecting your demon patron, it is time to make your way into the actual meat of the game. First, with the introduction to the world map that has you clicking on various locations to travel so you can interact with what's there, usually dungeons but occasionally towns, to serve as hubs for your adventures in a region. It's here that you'll first notice an odd tendency towards right-click for movement and map selection with left-click being used for menu navigation, which will feel awkward for the first little bit, but you do get used to it after a while. After gathering your first mission from the town, you'll be introduced to the dungeon and combat mechanics you will use for the rest of the game, with dungeons using a red avatar navigating the map to reach various nodes to investigate. At each of these nodes, you can find things ranging from shrines that grant you bonuses based on the demon that you choose to praise at them, to random treasures or even key items for progress, and even sometimes encounters with enemies, and you usually will not know which of these it is until you interact with it or you've played it before. Though do keep an eye peeled, since completing quests can cause new nodes to appear, or even gain more options for interactions at old nodes, which thankfully do switch from red to white if that occurs. Though throughout exploring these, you will enter combat eventually, either through RNG deciding this location is a battle for you rather than a trap or an item, or just by moving around and having the hostility meter reach maximum, in case you were wondering what that little skull on the right was for. Though you can delay it by using the eye icon for temporary invisibility, but that only works once between each battle. Though either way, when you get into combat, you will find a fairly familiar system. Turn-based combat with a time-based fatigue system determining turn order, and how long it is between actions. The timer located across the top will give you clues to this, and the skill descriptions located at the bottom will give you an idea how fast or slow a skill will be, or even if it can slow down enemies. Though do remember, every action will take at least one measure of time, so you cannot just drop all the mana skills without enemies getting in action. In the beginning, combat will be easy, just slash them in the face or maybe cast a magic bolt depending on your class, and move on. Though as you progress, you'll learn new skills and tricks, though don't expect them to stay exclusive to you since the enemies are tied to demons too, and will often end up using your own tricks against you depending on what area you're in. In terms of how you improve your character, there's actually several systems at work here. The first you'll encounter will be your active and passive skills, with active skills obviously adding abilities to your bottom bar, while passive skills augment your every action, or in some cases trigger in reaction to certain character or enemy states. After that, you'll likely learn the features of a system called Momentum that triggers every few rounds of combat and gives you the ability to trigger a single-use skill that you select from a list to add to the menu. And as you level up, you do gain more slots for this so you can choose more. You also gain slots for things called stances that give you a specific boost to aid you in battle as long as you remain in said stance. The in-game explanations for all of these are fairly well done and will make it fairly clear what each of the abilities do and how to use them, so I have to give them kudos there as well. On top of that, there is a global boost system, but it is more tied to the story progress than necessarily getting levels or finding items, and gives a vibe very similar to the progression of roguelites as you advance along and choose your specific bonuses based on how far along you are. The one spot that is a little odd though is the equipment system. The normal inventory and equipment are fairly straightforward. You find items, you equip them, you get their effects, and you have only so much you can carry to prevent you from hoarding all the baubles and selling them. The weirdness comes in with the crafting. For the basic crafting, I figured it out pretty easily, and even got some gear from it, and it's basically you finding clues on maps, reading their descriptions, and deciphering what items you need to combine to create a higher tier item with fairly strong mods for its levels. Later on, you can get access to another tier of crafted items though, and despite following what it said in the item descriptions, I was never able to get them to work, so I may have been missing a key function there that I'm unaware of, though it didn't hamper my progress any, since by the time those items rolled around, enemy drops had been fairly good to me too, and I had my core setup pretty much squared away, so it didn't hurt me. It's just I kinda wish I could have crafted them, I just couldn't figure it out. Throughout this, we focus mainly on the mechanics, but as we all know, a game is much more than just the gears and levers you pull. The graphical aspects of Hellslave are interesting as well, and they're very similar to Ars Goetia's previous game, The Blind Prophet, albeit obviously dark fantasy rather than sci-fi. This grungy look works very well in most cases, with a feel like the late 80s comic books meet Dark Souls monster design, with the cinematics matching that even closer. It is also worth noting that each dungeon generally has its own distinct aesthetic within that art style as well, which is oddly rare these days sadly, but it is very welcome, and I can honestly say it feels like there were only a couple reused enemies, but they made sense where they were reused. My only visual complaints would pretty much be two user interface issues. One is a bug with the screen shake not always working properly, sometimes starting a battle shaking even, and needing you to perform a shaking attack to get it to settle down. And this would be fixable with a setting to remove screen shake, and I'm sure certain people would appreciate it in general due to sometimes screen shake triggering motion sickness. The other would be certain aspects of the user interface feeling, well, clumsy, such as the arrow to move all found items to the inventory, moving up and down depending on how many items you found, the item deletion method requiring just an awkward interaction pattern that feels like it should have been a drag and drop rather than a click system, and how the game never tells you that you can manually arrange the skills at the bottom. I do kind of wish that had been mentioned in the active skill tutorial segment, since I didn't realize it until several dungeons in. I also know that they're working on a controller system for this, but as of the time of my playthrough, this had not been implemented yet, so I can't comment on how well that works with the setup, and whether it improves the interface system or not. Audio-wise, I actually enjoyed it a lot. The combat sounds felt meaty without being overly repetitive, outside of me spamming one skill for a few dungeons because I accidentally stumbled upon some really strong cheese strategies. But the actual skills are diverse enough to keep that from being a problem in normal play. As far as the music, it never felt intrusive to me, and there were even a couple banger tracks, especially in battles, which for me is what the goal of good sound design should be in a game. So I have to give them kudos for keeping that balance very well established. And if you don't like the combat sounds, the game does let you have some limited tools for adjusting them through a music slider and a sound effects slider in options, which are relatively bare. Though as you guessed, that does bring us to the options menu, and the game's options in general, you wouldn't be at fault for thinking it doesn't have them, at first at least, since it doesn't have one on the main menu screen, only giving you access to the options once you get into the actual game. So make sure your speakers are at a reasonable level when you launch it the first time. But once you get in, you do have access to a very simple options menu, where you can adjust the audio, save your game, which actually is important to do, as well as load it if you decide you want to do some save scumming. You can also select your language and even adjust your difficulty on the fly here, though do realize changing difficulty will reset your gold to 0, so be careful even if you adjust it down. Now, I do find a conspicuous lack of visual options, though being indie and 2D, this is not all that surprising, though I would have loved to see a disable screen shake option, both in-game as well as for the main menu, which is a little bit wavy, since I know people this will give motion sickness to. And while the flashing in the game wasn't too obscene, there were a few spots where it was there. An epilepsy filter is always a welcome addition too, though that might be out of the scope of the resources and abilities this studio has. Overall, I enjoyed my time with the game, even though I was able to beat it and the New Game Plus insane difficulty together in under 12 hours. If you don't find the cheese strategy though, it will take closer to that amount of time to beat the game in normal alone, though it could be streamlined a bit if some of the backtracking was removed or simplified, especially situations like a certain sewer requiring a trip back to town to use, or having to traverse to various roadblocks to trigger the ability to interact with certain objects in the world. This wouldn't make a massive difference, maybe about 30 minutes total in the game, but it would help the overall flow and immersiveness. As far as the spoiler-free feeling I have for the ending, I feel like there should have been an alternate ending, though I was never able to find a way to trigger one, and normally I would not have a problem with a single ending, but the overall feel of the story does give you the sense that there should be a choice to be made, though if there's a way to make said choice, I was never able to find it on my playthroughs. While this game was provided via a press key, if you have any special games, new or old, that you'd like to see reviewed, feel free to suggest them down below. Though channel members and patrons do get priority, I do listen to all the suggestions, and provided they at least suggest games that are interesting to look at and I have access to. And as always, keep gaming, have fun, and peace out. This has been Alzorath. Bye.